Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. It was such a long walk over, for those of you know. And getting across Howard sometimes is a little bit dicey. Particularly when Muni is running by. It's really kind of fun. I don't even know where to start. I have not been at Pivotal. Last time I was in a Pivotal office was 2011. So who was here in 2011? Raise your hand. Glad a couple of people. So you remember that? I know you. Yes, I remember you. You're still here. It's amazing. Yeah, it was a hot, sweaty, cramped office. I'm pretty sure I ruined several shirts visiting there from just how uncomfortable it is. So you guys, much better offices. I really like it here. The food is always as good. Love your ping pong tables. I'd like to get one. So if somebody wants to help me get in the elevator, let me know. The last year has been really interesting, and the last 18 months has been really interesting in tech, in that companies have really leaned in, to use a term that's probably overloaded at this point, into reporting their numbers on diversity, reporting their progress or lack thereof. If you looked at Google's latest report that they, I think, released on Friday at 4:45, essentially showing no substantial movement whatsoever in their diversity efforts, despite spending, probably tens of millions of dollars. And there are a lot of reasons why, and I'm not going to really get into the reasons why. I think those are going to be debated by people a much higher pay grade than myself. But I do want to talk about what it is like to be, so what I call just a bit player in tech. It's odd to walk in to a place. And even now I'm looking around, and I'm the only black person standing here. This is, and if for those of you who think that that's uncomfortable from where you sit, it's really uncomfortable from where I stand. But it's been my life. It's been every day of my career, up until recently, up until joining Slack, where I would walk in and I would be the only African American, or the only person of color, if not in the company, then definitely in engineering. I would also be the only person of color or the African American in management. And that continues today in 2016. It was that way at Twitter with over 2,000 engineers, with over 200 engineering managers and directors. It was that way at Google, where in Mountain View, I think I was the only African American manager for 2 years. So it's an interesting experience to have. And so I'm going to give a little bit of what I've experienced, some of the questions I've gotten, some of the questions some of my peers have gotten, and maybe a possible way forward. So what's a bit? We all know what it is. It's the basic unit of information in computing and digital communications. It's funny, it can have one of two values. I call it black or white. This is kind of my nerd humor coming out here, so feel free not to laugh. I thought it was really interesting because I always have felt like a bit player in technology. And one of the reasons I feel like it is that I get these kind of questions in interviews. And these are not from 2002. These are from 2012 on. Yeah, am I here to fix a copy machine? Yeah, my sister, I dated somebody who was black. I don't know how that's appropriate in an interview unless they're trying to set me up. My actually favorite is, do you mind if the co-founder is a racist? How do you answer that question? I'm sure none of you have had that question. I've never worked with black people. I don't even know why that's a question. And I'm like, well, you probably won't now. And something I actually heard during a pitch competition, it wasn't me, but it was one of the VCs said, this is like, can you get a white co-founder? Because his entire team was African American. Said, as a white co-founder, you will never hear that. As an Asian co-founder, you will never hear that you have to get that. It is something is fundamentally wrong with people who think that it's okay to ask these questions. And I always thought, well, maybe it was me, maybe it's my experience. Maybe, I'm just in this own bubble for myself. But it also just made me always feel small. Somebody asking me a question. It's like I'm there on my qualifications. I'm not there because I'm black. I'm not there because I'm a woman or because I'm a minority. I'm there because I've worked my ass off. And yet, those questions make you feel small, like your accomplishments mean nothing. And many of those jobs I didn't get, many of those jobs I would not take. But at the end of the day, I always felt diminished. And I have to go home and try to work through that. And you know what the really bad part about that is? There aren't enough black people in tech that you can pick up the phone and call and commiserate with them. For years, I didn't have anyone in tech who was at a level higher than mine that I could talk to. No one would have my experience. I would walk around companies literally looking for black people just to find somebody to talk to. So if you ever see black people at a company looking around, they're looking for each other. And if you know where the other black people are, please tell them. Just like over there, to the right. But it does it makes you feel small, and it makes you change who you are so that you try to fit in a little bit more. It makes you change how you approach people, how you talk with people, how you talk with, as a manager and as a leader, how I interact with my employees. Because I've gotten questions from my employees that, and I hate to say my employees, but people who've worked for me, people, who report to me in the command chain. One of my favorite was during an interview process, and this was at Apple. We were interviewing, and I'm interviewing a host of people, and we were in an interview debriefing panel. And it was myself, it was two South Asian people from South Asia, and a white gentleman. And after we finished the debriefing, he says, "Hey, can I ask a question? Are we going to interview any white people?" Which my mind just blew. I'm like, first of all, how do you even think that's a question to ask in a group of mixed people? And that, to me, I was like, that's privilege personified. I have never, ever, up until recently, said, will we ever interview any black people? Will we ever interview any women? Just recently, I've begun to do that. And I think just recently, other people have begun to do it, which is great. But the privilege that somebody would actually say that when they make up 75% of any engineering organization, it's amazing to me. So those things make you feel, you can be made to feel small, even by people, all throughout the organization. But this is what other people have had to experience. And if you take nothing away, read the paragraph at the bottom. It's a well-known co-founder, probably raised over $150 million for two different companies, continues to work in tech. And personally, if I were Mackin Day, I would have called the guy out and named him, because I'm like, yeah, people don't need to go and work with you. But that makes everyone feel smaller. I was shocked when he published this on Medium. And I reached out and I said, dude, who is this guy? We'll catch him when he's leaving work late at night. Just to talk to him. We're not going to do it, just to talk to him. Which, probably wouldn't be a bad thing. If he had two black guys showing up at him late at night while he's leaving his office, maybe then he can have a reason to feel this way. But today, no. As I said, it's always made me feel really, really small. So I ask people, it's like, what can you do, right? People say, well, what can I do? What can I do? I'm like, understand that when you're sitting in front of someone who is a woman or is a LGBT or is a minority, underrepresented minority, they've gone through a lot to get there. And they're not going to tell you. And I'm not going to sit in front of the interview and say, do you know all this baggage I have from the previous 15 years? But it's there. And people are bringing it every day, and they're trying to be their best selves. And it's very difficult. And most that any of us can do is try to learn a little bit from this, is to talk to other people. Google how to be an ally. I can't tell you how to be an ally. Google is really good at that. Google is an amazing thing. It will give you all the information you need to be an ally. And ask people what you can do. One of my favorite stories or events was when DeRay McKesson was on the Colbert Report, and they switched places, those of you who saw that. And Colbert said, "I'm extending my privilege." It's like, I don't need a hand. I don't need help. I've done fairly well in tech. But every now and then, I need someone to extend their privilege. And extending your privilege means when someone's being othered, when they're being called out in ways that are racist or it's a microaggression, stand up for them. And if you don't stand up for them at the time, stand up for them later. But let them know that you heard it, that you saw it, that you recognize it. Because no one ever came to me afterwards and said, "That sucks, Leslie." No one ever came to me afterward and said, "How do you feel about this?" You know, I just was supposed to get over it, move on, and do the best work of my career. And it's difficult to do the best work of your career when you expect someone to treat you differently, when you expect someone to say something from a position of privilege that you just can't grok sometimes. And I want to give you like probably the point where I finally decided that speaking my mind was more important than anything else was after I left Twitter. Some of you may have read about it. After I left Twitter, I went back a couple of days and met with the senior VP of engineering, who we had a few conversations about diversity and hiring. And the first thing he said to me when we sat down, and it was somewhat of a Twitter storm about what had happened, was, "It's been the worst 36 hours of my life because people are hating me on Twitter, and they're calling me a racist, and they're calling me a bigot." I'm sitting there like, "And? You're upset by this?" He's like, "Well, I'm not that person." I'm like, "Well, first of all," I'm like, my mind's reeling on this. It's like, you're not even saying you're sorry to me. You're not saying you're sorry that you laid off 300 people. You're not saying you were wrong. You're saying it's been the worst time of your existence. It's like, that's the privilege that people bring. And he doesn't know it. He didn't know that. And I looked at him and said, "I'm sorry you're experiencing this, but this is the platform that you're running. And the reason you don't expect this is because people like you never get this on the internet. You don't get abused on Twitter. It's like, I'm sorry, white men just don't get abused on Twitter unless they're Justin Timberlake and tweet." Poor Justin, felt kind of bad for him. But I realized at that moment that the only way for me to feel good about myself is every time I see that I speak up. Every time, and it's not in a mean way. I don't expect people to get over their privilege any more than they should expect me to get over my blackness. It's who we are, but we can have the conversation. And my goal now is just to, when I see it, when I hear it, when I experience it, is to bring it up, and to bring it up in a respectful manner. It's been interesting. It's been fun. I've not received any negative feedback. I've had an opportunity to do this on several occasions. One company that I was working with, they were very big on diversity, and they said this is very important. And then they decided to open up an office in Boulder, Colorado. And I said, "Why not open it someplace else?" And it was interesting. They're like, "Well, the talent's not in these cities." I'm like, "What about Detroit? What about Atlanta? What about Cleveland, Cincinnati?" So there's no talent in those areas. I'm like, "How do you know?" And it was silence. And the CEO he actually put his head in his hands, and he was like, "I cannot believe it." I'm like, "Yes, these are the conversations we need to have." Because if I just show up and say, "You're racist," you're going to shut down, you're not going to say anything. Or if you just say to me, it's like, "Well, we did our job, and that's the best city with the best talent, and I'm not open to discussing it," then we don't move forward. So it's been really, really interesting, and this is what I encourage all of you, who are going to customer sites and pairing with people, and understand that if you're pairing with someone who's an underrepresented minority, they have faced significant hurdles, and sometimes that will come out, and sometimes it won't. And you don't have to bring it up. You don't have to say I'm woke. You don't have to. You don't have to wear your Black Power shirt. But if anybody has one, let me know, because I lost mine. No, I did. I left it somewhere. I haven't been able to find it. And just understand that. I think that may be the last slide. Oh, yeah. I'm Leslie Miley. I'm Black in Technology. Thanks.
Yeah, so are there any questions?
Really? Sweet.
Looks like we've got one in the back, and we don't have a wireless mic, so you'll just have to shout.
Do you have any idea about the sense of, because what we're talking about is in effect stereotyping, and this happened, one of my friends who's a Black founder of a startup said, look, he dresses really nice. He said, if I wear a hoodie, I'm in the wrong part of town, I get shot. If I'm white and I wear a hoodie, people think I'm a startup founder. It's amazing, and that really hit me as a statement about how we think about things. But is it that we have an overfocus of what a definition of a person in tech is? Individual culture. There are certain kind of book, a certain kind of field, and that's defining, that's really what we're dealing with that larger issue as well. What is your take on basically how do we open up the definition of what a person in tech is? Starting with this obviously is a good place.
How do we open up what a definition of a person in tech is? Take Silicon Valley off the air, because it shows what the stereotype is. Stop putting forward the 25-year-old white co-founder or the 25-year-old Asian co-founder as models, and put technology centers in places where there are people of color. Boulder, Cambridge, Seattle, Portland. That's where people go. Austin. All of those have less than double-digit underrepresented minorities, with the exception of Austin, which is mainly Hispanic. It has a large Hispanic population. So that's a way to start. And start putting people of color, start putting women out in front and letting other people see them. Somebody asked me, how can they make tech cool? And I'm like, for kids in inner cities and underrepresented children. And I said, show them people that look like them succeeding in this, and they will aspire to that. And we don't do that because, you fit the model, and you fit the model, but I don't fit the model. And that's why you have questions, get a white co-founder. And this keeps coming, even today, it keeps coming up. And I think that's how you change the stereotype. If you don't start there, we're going to be having this conversation in 10 years. If you look at Google's numbers, you can understand why we're still having this conversation. Because Google doubles down on Cambridge, Massachusetts. They double down on Boulder. They double down on Austin. They double down on Seattle. They double down on San Francisco. And you're not going to get people of color in those areas. And you're not going to get it because it's hostile. See people who went through the same life lessons that I've gone through. And so I think tech has to reach out. And when I say reach out, not reach out and pull people into the San Francisco Bay Area. Because if I'm in Atlanta, if I'm in Cincinnati, if I'm in New York, I don't want to come here. Because I don't have friends, I don't have family, I don't have a community here. Sorry you got me on one, but hope I answered your question.
So sort of related to that, how do you balance, kind of showing folks that there are, Black people in tech, women in tech, et cetera, by kind of highlighting like, hey, here are some sort of non-traditional tech types who have succeeded. How do you balance that with then kind of bringing that around and making people see tech more holistically as like, okay, these are tech people first, and then it's not like the number one thing that's interesting about them is not that they're women or not that they're Black, it's that they're in tech. Like, that make sense?
No, but I'll try. You're. Without tokenizing them. How do you not tokenize people? Yeah, that's a good question, and I think there's a fine line. I think you try to do it as authentically as you can. I've been in situations where, one situation where we were having a meeting at Twitter about spam and anti-spam and some of the tools we made and the security changes that we've made. And we were all sitting in the back, and I realized that everyone up there is a white or Asian male, and yet the architect of the system's a woman who was never asked to speak. And so somebody realized this and then grabbed her and dragged her on the stage. And I just felt so bad. And I'm like, so that's not what you do. I think Apple is trying by having women present at their WWDC and at their events. I think some companies are trying, but it is going to be, it's like you have to be authentic. You have to do it with purpose. And you have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that you are putting someone out there, but you're not putting them out there because they're a woman or they're an underrepresented minority. It's because they're qualified, and they should be out there, and they should be given the opportunity just like someone else. It's hard, and I get your question, and I don't know. I mean, I think if you do things like, it's hard to do here, because if you put me on the stage, somebody will be like, well, he's the only black guy they have. Who else are they going to put on stage? But if you are in a city like Memphis, that's 30% black, right? Or if you are in a city like San Antonio, that's 40% Hispanic, it's a little easier.
So, Leslie, do you have advice for us where we have, here in the San Francisco office, we have no black people who are in leadership, let's say management, that I'm aware of, on the engineering side. How do we make this an appealing place to somebody like you or a young college graduate when we don't have our first manager in place? How do we get started? How do we bootstrap?
I don't know. I don't know how you make it attractive. It's hard, right? It's like, come someplace that you may not feel at home. That's hard for it to be attractive. I think what you can do, and what I've been proposing is, imagine this model. Imagine if Google, instead of, in addition to giving money to Black Girls Code, in addition to working with Grace Hopper, working with Code 2040, said we're going to send 100 engineering jobs to Detroit. And we're going to do it just like we did New York office or any of our other offices. We're going to anchor it. We're going to have people come out from Mountain View and from New York, anchor the office, and then we're going to staff up this office. And we're going to staff it up with engineering managers and directors and a VP. And just by virtue of demographics, you're going to get diversity in Detroit. And then what happens is that people in those far-flung offices want advancement. So they come back to headquarters. So they go back to Mountain View, or they go to Cupertino, or they come to San Francisco. And because diversity has this great effect of amplifying diversity, they will hire people who look like them. And that network will grow. I think that's how you make it. You have to go into the communities. We can't make the community here, right? It's not all of a sudden you can, and trust me, I'm trying at Slack. I like, you come to Slack, it's much different than any other tech company. But we still find it difficult to diversify the workforce. We are one of the most inclusive cultures I've ever been at, and I enjoy it immensely. But it's still hard to find because the numbers are working against us.
Could you talk more about what Slack does to be an inclusive community?
They let me do things like this. They let me go out and speak on my own. They really push everyone in the company to be more inclusive and to think about it. We have an interview or a coding exercise that's graded blindly. So the graders don't know who they're grading. They don't know man, woman, child. They don't know university graduate, dropout. It's all done blindly. And it's fascinating to see the mix of people we get in, because just by doing that, it's highly diverse. I think almost 50% of the engineering candidates are women. not because we're actually and that's actually who make it to the interview process. So that doesn't mean we're sourcing 50% women. I don't know what percentage we source, but I know that 50% seem to be coming through. So that's something else we do. And we have really, really difficult conversations in the open. The great thing about Slack, I don't know if you use Slack, I hope you do. Thank you, keep using it. Get your clients to use it. The great thing is that most of the conversations take place in Slack. So people see them and they can join in on them. And I've been part and parcel to conversations at Slack that I had never thought I would have at work before. And it is about inclusion. It is about what we get right and sometimes what we don't get right, because we do get several things wrong. I mean, I'm very, very vocal about this. Our entire senior leadership in engineering is white men. And it was called out during a company meeting. And people had to stand up and address that. And I was like, wow, that's never happened before. And I'm not sure if it's happened anyplace else. But that's one thing that we do. And I think that draws people in.
So I came into engineering through a coding boot camp. And I know a lot of the women that went to that boot camp with me, that was their path into tech. And a number of the women I work with here also came into tech through coding boot camps. And I'm just curious what your experience has been in terms of how those kind of accelerators impact the diversity of applicants, or what Slack's take is on that.
I wish I could remember the numbers. We have a large percentage of our female engineers came through, Hackbright, Hacker School. And I think if you can do the job, you can do the job. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're on a lamp stack, right? I mean, so we're not doing deep, computer science. We're not doing deep algorithmic work. We're building a messaging tool. It's not rocket science. So it has really helped. And I think a lot of companies need to get over you need to have a 4-year computer science degree. Most of the people I've worked with did not need a 4-year computer science degree to do the work that we were having them to do. So I think it has definitely helped. And we're going to continue to look in places like that because, we just don't find people who know how to do the job. We find people with diverse backgrounds. We find people with totally different experiences that just bring so much more to the table. I have some of the most engaging conversations with people. I'm like, what did you do before this? I was working in the Senate as whatever people in the Senate do, working for a senator. I don't know. And you just hear things like, I want to work with people like this. I don't want to work with everybody who went to 6 different schools and who all know the same thing, who never had any adversity, who never had a problem paying their bills, who just showed up and, somebody rolled out the carpet for them. Sorry, I'm a little bit jaded on that.
Do you remember anything from, maybe especially when you're first starting out or first working as a manager, that someone said that just helped you feel at home in your working environment? Like any memory from a colleague in your past?
We may be here for a while. It's hard, and probably not until recently. Bad managers, unfortunately, or inexperienced managers, there's no law against them, and there are a lot of them in tech, particularly in engineering, because we've had a history of promoting people based upon their technical ability, not on their managerial or leadership ability. And I've had many of those in my career where you just like layer that on top of being an underrepresented minority in tech. It's like, it's amazing I'm still here. And it is amazing because people who have bad managers, they can just stop your career in its tracks and you have to start over. So, and the way I think maybe for me, what made me feel more comfortable was what Stuart Butterfield, the CEO of Slack, said to me in my first couple of weeks there. He's like, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build a company that will hopefully be extremely successful so the people who are here can fund their own companies. And that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about having an inclusive culture, because the only way to change the ratio, to truly change the ratio, is to have people who look like you start their own companies or have their own funds. And that made me feel good because he got it. It's like, you get that you can't hire people into this. is that you need to get people who understand diversity and inclusion from having experienced it to start their own companies and fund and have their own funds. So essentially, he just wants to make the most inclusive PayPal mafia that he can. So those of you who don't know what PayPal mafia is, Google it, and I'm sure there's a Wikipedia page entry on it. Hi.
What's your opinion on implicit bias in the tech industry, and what do you think we can improve in encouraging people, minorities, people speaking up about the kind of implicit stereotypes that constantly? It's like not really racist, not really stereotypical, but like when people judge your culture's food, like when people tell women that you're too aggressive, are they considering like maybe I have this stereotype of women being aggressive whenever they speak up?
That's a really good question, and how can you address implicit bias from whether it's cultural, whether it's gender, or just whether it's a good example is Facebook when Mark Zuckerberg went all crazy about stop taking defacing Black Lives Matter on the wall and putting all lives matter. That's a part of implicit bias because people are looking at that and said, well, I don't know why they're doing this. And I think you have to call it out. And then you have to have discussions around, and you have to, Erica Baker says something which is, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that is probably the hardest thing for all of us to do because we have to stand in front of people we work with and say, what did you mean by that? What did you mean that I'm being too aggressive or I'm being too pushy? And list goes, and I've sat in the meetings where people's like, oh, excuse me, and I'm going to be very blunt here, that woman's being a bitch. I'm like, why is she being a bitch? Well, she's just too aggressive. I'm like, yeah, I've heard that too. I'm too intimidating. I'm scary. People have told me I'm scary. I'm like, I don't know. I don't look scary. I don't sound scary. There may be some people in here who've seen me upset. I may be scary when I get upset, but I generally just leave. But those are the things that people see. They see a woman being, I'm not going to say even aggressive or assertive, but just being like her male peers, and they call that aggressive. They see me when I'm in an intense mood and trying to get work done as being aggressive and being intimidating. And I've been called the scary black man. I'm like, really? I'm like, well, I don't know. It's crazy. So I think you ask people what they mean by it, and you do it in a respectful manner, in a considerate manner, and you may help them see how they are bringing that bias to the table. It's going to continue to happen. And it will, you read about it almost every day, whether it's Michael Moritz getting up there talking about, I've got binders of women, but we're not going to lower the bar. Why did you, it's like, why, that's implicit bias, and you're not going to lower the bar. And everyone has, literally everyone has said it. People at Twitter have said it. People at Apple have said it. People, Zuckerberg said it a few years ago. And I'm sure he's been educated, since then, and people have really talked to him about it. But that's the kind of bias. And that bias extends to where people open their offices. Great example. About this time last year, March of 2015, Twitter went on this, we need to, get the top university students from China. So a quarterly engineering team flew over to China, interviewed, 200 university students, selected 40 of them. They did interviews via, remote interviews, extended like 33 some odd offers. None of them passed security check to get a visa to come to the United States. They will go to China to do that, but we couldn't get money to recruit from Morehouse. They could send an entire engineering contingent of 20 managers to China, extend offers, and not have any of them come through, and we couldn't get any recruiting resources for Spelman. There's something that's not implicit bias, that's explicit bias, right? That's just bias. I was like, really? So you're going to think that flying halfway across the world, expending these resources, then not hiring anybody was a good use of resources as opposed to $5,000 to fly 2 recruiters for 5 days to a historically black college. These are the things that, it's not just you and I, it's people making those decisions and why they make those decisions.
Yes, I guess that leads to my question, like, what are the conversations with VCs like? Because we have these conversations and it's great and it opens everyone's eyes, but I mean, for a lot of companies, they're the ones who hold the purse strings.
I have friends who are VCs, which I think is great to say. I have friends who are VCs. Many of my friends are VCs. And they all say the same thing, almost to it's like they went to the same school or something. They say we're not worried about diversity, we're worried about returning value to our LPs and our GPs. If diversity is part of that, great. This has been, almost to the word, this is what's been said to me by several Excel, Kleiner Perkins, Shasta, New Canaan. I can just keep going on and on and on. This is what's been said. And I sit there and I'm like, well, we can't win, which is why we need our own Slack mafia, right? Because that's not going to change. Andreessen maybe is changing it. And they've been very quiet in what they're trying to do. So definitely want to call them out for trying. You look in their office and you're like, well, this doesn't look like any other office on Sand Hill Road. But most of them are just about returning value to their LPs and their GPs. So diversity is, and when they say that that's not, and if it's great, that means they're not even thinking about it. And if you don't think about it, it's not going to change. That's a good question. If you have any VCs you want to introduce me to, I'd be more than happy to have them buy me lunch. I wish. That would be amazing. But no, not currently. But Uber is. How do y'all feel about that? Tepid. Tepid. Uber is an interesting case. They bought this building, they're refurbishing the building. I'm always wondering, well, since you're doing that, why not train the people in the neighborhood to do the jobs in the building? You don't need a computer science degree to be a project manager. You don't. Why not give scholarships to people there to go to a coding school? I don't understand why we don't invest like that. For those of you who have traveled overseas and who have gone to some of the tech centers in China or India, one of the fascinating things that I saw, particularly in Hyderabad and Mumbai and Pune, is that they had entire university-like settings on their tech campuses where they would take students right out of school and put them through essentially a programming course over the course of 3, 6, 8 months, teach them how to program, and then turn around and have us pay $30 an hour for them. At least this was what happened when I was at Apple. And I thought it was genius because not only did you create your own talent, but you, and the way they did it at these companies, is that they would sign you up and then you'd be obligated for 2 or 3 or 4 years at a particular salary. So they would lock you in. There's nothing stopping us from doing that here, and I don't know why we don't do it. And is it because it? And actually, I do know why. Let me stop. I do know why. It comes back to I'm buying into my own bullshit right now. It comes back to bias. We don't think the talent exists in these cities to do that. When I say we, I mean we in tech. Y'all in tech.
I've heard people say they like to hire for potential. They we're really good at hiring for aptitude. Well, when people of color or women are hired, they're hired for their accomplishments. When white men are hired, they're hired for aptitude. And so it seems like it leaves this big door open for a lot of bias, where there's we judge aptitude based on heuristics born out of our own identities. Oh, I see in this person this part of me that made me good at this, and so I think they'll end up good at this too. I still really want to be able to hire for aptitude, and I feel like opening the we hire for aptitude door to people who are less like us is important, but I don't know how to do it. Do you have any idea how to do that?
How to hire for Aptitude. I celebrate differences. This is when I interview, I will almost always vote higher if I walk out of the interview having learned something that I did not know before. That strips away almost everything for me, because that means that wherever this person came from, they have taught me something. And we had that kind of interaction. And so I do hire for potential. But I don't look at potential in the guise of, African American or woman. I try to understand the experience that people bring. But but you bring up an interesting point, and I think it's harder for people who have never had to who have been faced with that. And I learned a very interesting fact last night that blew my mind. And we talk about potential and how people gauge it. In the 60s and 70s, did you know that African Americans were given less money in welfare than white families? I did not know this until last night, based upon the welfare workers' opinion. It's just like they just felt that black people needed less money. So when you talk about potential, when you talk about aptitude, that's a very dangerous place to be. And I think if you're going to try to do that, you really need to understand how you're applying it, and come up with a way with the rest of your organization on how to do that, or you'll just fall into that trap. I hope that answered your question. So the answer is no. No, I don't know how. Yeah, and that's why it's like I just try to bring my own experience. Cool. I'll make my next one-on-one. Thank you all. It was great seeing all of you. I really appreciate you guys having me. This means a lot to me from an industry standpoint, from a professional standpoint, and from a personal standpoint. I want to thank Marie for hooking her brother up. I want to thank Krista for letting me scarf down some food. And I want to thank you guys for being open to this. Thanks.